Picture a quiet suburban street in Enfield, London, in the late summer of 1977. Green Street seemed just like any other ordinary neighborhood, rows of identical houses, children playing in the evenings, families living their day-to-day lives. But by the end of August, one house on this street, number 284, would become a magnet for attention from the press, police, and even paranormal investigators. This is where the Hodgson family lived: Peggy, a single mother, and her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. They had no idea their lives were about to be turned upside down. The events that began here would go down as one of the most chilling and well-documented poltergeist cases in history. Let me take you inside this ordinary home where the extraordinary occurred. The Hodgson family had already faced their share of struggles. Peggy was a divorced mother, raising her children in a council house. Life wasn't easy, but they were managing. Then, on the night of August 30th, 1977, things began to change. 11-year-old Janet woke her mother in the middle of the night, claiming that her bed was shaking. Peggy, understandably, thought Janet was playing a prank or imagining things. After all, how could a bed just shake by itself? Peggy sent Janet back to bed, dismissing the event as a child's overactive imagination, but the very next night, it wasn't just Janet who noticed something was wrong. Strange noises began echoing through the house, soft at first, like faint taps, but growing louder and more distinct. Janet's younger brother Johnny heard them too, and soon neither child could sleep. They called out to their mother, who entered their room, ready to scold them for staying up late. But what happened next would make Peggy question everything she thought she knew. Peggy entered the room to check on Janet and Johnny, annoyed at their complaints about strange noises. The room was silent, and she saw nothing unusual. "Go back to sleep," she told them. But just as she turned off the light and prepared to leave, she heard it, a low, shuffling noise. She froze, listening closely. The sound grew louder, resembling footsteps, like someone dragging their slippers across the floor. But no one else was in the house. Suddenly, a heavy oak chest of drawers in the corner of the room began to move. It slid forward, inching toward the doorway as if pushed by an invisible hand. Peggy watched in disbelief, her mind racing for a logical explanation. She grabbed the chest and pushed it back into place, thinking perhaps it was on uneven flooring. But no sooner had she stepped back than it moved again, this time with greater force. The chest of drawers seemed to have a mind of its own, and it was now blocking the door entirely. Peggy tried with all her strength to move it, but it wouldn't budge. Then, without warning, loud knocking erupted from the walls. It wasn't a random noise, it was deliberate, like someone pounding with their fists, the sound echoing through the entire house. Terrified, Peggy grabbed her children and fled to the only place she could think of, her neighbor's house. The Hodgsons burst into the Nottingham family's home, shaking and pale with fear. Peggy told her neighbors what had happened, her voice trembling as she described the noises, the moving furniture, and the chest of drawers that seemed alive. Vic Nottingham, a builder and a practical man, agreed to go back with Peggy to investigate. Surely, he thought, there had to be a logical explanation, a prank, or perhaps an intruder hiding in the house. But as they entered 284, Green Street, Vic immediately heard it, the same loud, deliberate pounding on the walls. He searched every room, every closet, and even checked the windows for signs of forced entry. There was no one there. The noises, however, didn't stop. They seemed to follow him, moving from one wall to another as if mocking his efforts. Convinced this was no ordinary disturbance, the Nottinghams urged Peggy to call the police. When the police arrived, the Hodgson family was still in a state of panic. Officers Carolyn Heaps and her colleague were skeptical at first. They'd dealt with many domestic disturbances, but nothing quite like this. As they questioned Peggy, a sudden movement caught Officer Heaps's eye. She turned and saw a chair sliding across the living room floor, seemingly propelled by an invisible force. In her official report, Officer Heaps later described the event in detail. She couldn't explain it. There were no wires, no strings, nothing that could account for what she saw. And yet, as bizarre as it was, the police were powerless to act. After all, how could they arrest a ghost? Their advice to Peggy was simple but unsettling: this is beyond our expertise. With no help from the authorities, Peggy was left to face the unknown on her own. Desperate for answers, Peggy turned to the press. Journalists from the Daily Mirror arrived at the house, eager for a sensational story. But what they found was far more than they had bargained for. At first, the house seemed calm, almost disappointingly normal. Then, as the journalists prepared to leave, the noises began again, louder and angrier than ever. Photographer Graham Morris described the chaos. Small objects, like marbles and Lego bricks, began flying through the air. He managed to snap a photo of a Lego brick hovering mid-flight before it struck him squarely in the forehead, leaving him stunned. The reporters left the house that day, convinced something truly strange was happening within its walls. Even after decades, the Enfield Poltergeist remains a source of debate. Was it an elaborate hoax? A case of mass hysteria? Or evidence of something truly paranormal? While skeptics point to moments of possible fraud, others believe the sheer volume of witnesses and evidence suggests otherwise. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: 284 Green Street will always be remembered as a house of mystery and terror. Do you believe in the paranormal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more real-life horror stories.